Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what part of the world you're in. Welcome to the Venture Outfitter, the Tech Ranch Venture Outfitter Weekly. Today we have a really special program. I'll go ahead and bring up the slides to keep everything on track. But part of what we're here to do with the Venture Outfitter is a program from Tech Ranch, and every week we do these programs at 11 o'clock Texas time to hear from different experts around the world to support us in moving our ventures forward. And I'm excited to be here today with the two gentlemen that you're going to hear from, as well as our studio audience that will have some questions back and forth. But part of the thing I want to do to start saying thanks is our studio is sponsored by the people at DuoWorks. DuoWorks is a co-working location in Austin, Texas, kind of if you look at the overall MTA, the city itself, we're actually right in the middle at 183, which is one of the main roads, 360 and Mopac. And the great thing about this is kind of center of the city, even though downtown thinks it is the center of the city. If you need a mailbox or everything from a mailbox to a closed door office, if you're out of the country and you need a mailbox, one of the great things about this group at DuoWorks is Linda Blackman was involved in Venture Force 17. That's more than a decade ago, and she really caters to tech ranchers. So thank you for that, Linda, and let us know if you have any questions about DuoWorks. Today's quote is from T.E. Lawrence. All men dream, but not equally. Those who dream by night in the dusty recesses of their minds wake in the day to find that it was vanity. But the dreamers of the day are dangerous men, for they may act on their dreams with open eyes to make them possible. It's really interesting. I picked this quote before the quotes that I'm going to be sharing that actually were released just last night. And when I look at this, I'm like, this is really coming true. It's interesting. Okay, so you can figure it out in just a second, but I'll tell you how this quote ties into activities of what's happening in the world in the last 24 hours. First off, part of what we look at is what's happening in the world. Given that many of you know that I've been in 27 countries in the last 6 years, part of the thing that's interesting to look at is what's happening in the world. And there's at this URL, you can look at some of the unemployment forecast about what's happening. It's surprising with all the different shifts that we've seen in global trade about how unemployment by and large has been pretty low, except for in places like South Africa, which has been interesting. So part of what, if you're interested in more details about this article, make sure you go to the community site. In the articles section of the community site, there's a lot of different articles that get shared by different members of the community. And the reason we do that is so that you have kind of a thing you can follow on about what's happening in the world to take advantage of some of these global connections. But that being said, really important news. Tesla confirmed yesterday that it's going to open its next gigafactory in Mexico. It's going to actually specifically be in Nuevo León. And for those of you that know about the Tech Ranch history, we have quite a history with Nuevo León, with more than 30 companies that we've worked with alone in Monterrey, Mexico. The governor of Nuevo León was here yesterday and took the photo above with Elon Musk. And his quote was very apropos for the theme that I'd already picked for this week. He said, "Thank you for letting us dream that our children will be astronauts, scientists, programmers, and engineers that are already building the future, to dream that we will soon be at the center of the world's development." That's Governor Samuel Garcia. He's a fairly young governor, and it's really interesting to see about how he has a very pro-business, driving very forward. And Nuevo León is interesting. In my history of being and doing work in Mexico, I first went to Nuevo León for business reasons when I was working for Next in 1991. And, this is me as I started my first company with my first startup and my first client in Mexico, in Guadalajara, Mexico in 1994. Yes, there was a moment that I actually still had hair. But the thing that's interesting about this is, I think many of you or any of y'all that have known me for very long know that I've been bullish about Mexico for a very long time. In fact, the number of technologies that, I mean, obviously there's technologies in Austin that we've bridged to the world, but there's a lot of technologies across different parts of Mexico that we bridge to the world. In fact, we have team members on our team that are based in Querétaro, Mexico, and also in Mexico City right now. And today in our studio audience, we'll hear from a few individuals that in our state called Chihuahua, as well as many times we'll have other people from other parts of Mexico just because of the long history. Real excited about having this bridge that's happening, and it's great to see that the world's discovering Mexico, just like Tesla has announced, because it's not just a lot of times I find that people are not aware of what's possible. The other thing that I'm excited about as well is some of the technologies that we're bringing from places like Japan are going to be directly applicable to opening up this Tesla plant. One of the reasons that the Tesla plant was not initially mentioned in Nuevo León was because of issues about water and other resource needs, because Nuevo León has mainly a desert. And so to kind of get you guys thinking about why this is important and why the Tech Ranch Network is important as well, is we're going to help bring technologies. One of the technologies that we're working with in Japan right now is a printed circuit board technology that uses 70% less water than the traditional way of doing that. And what is a Tesla car? It's just a computer with wheels. There's lots of printed circuit boards. So this type of thinking is fundamental to what's needed. Okay, well, that being said, if you're coming to Austin over the next couple of weeks, perhaps you're here for South by Southwest or something else. We have a lot of activities that we're going to be doing, and we're trying to think of the best way to share all those activities. We'll be announcing even more next week, this time, about what's happening and stuff like that. But the main thing about it is, if you want to get our map of where to go, and like I think I'm going to be speaking 5 times during March 10th through March 15th alone, even more if you include March 8th and March 9th. And so we'll share the different announcements. You're welcome to come join us. We will be having a special reception on March 11th at 5 p.m. that we'd love to have you involved in as well. You know, there's you don't have to have a South by Southwest badge for the activities that Tech Ranch has planned, and we have a couple of partner organizations that will be doing things as well. I have one of our partner organizations here, and I mentioned to Tyler Johnson. He has as I have my background on doing a lot of work in the Americas. He has a background in Asia. Tyler, give us like a 20-second, 30-second overview about your organization. Join us real quick. Thank you for being here today. And what are you up to, and what are you going to be doing South by, and tell us about Asia.
Hey, thanks for having me, Kevin. This is great. I just want to know one thing though. Do you still have that shirt from 1984? From the picture, the striped shirt.
The shirt, you know, 94. Do I still have it? No. An ex-girlfriend, he said, "Hey, this one, it's got to go." So right. it's been gone for a long time, just like my hair.
Mine too. Well, hey, thanks for the shout out here. I appreciate it. I have a business called Lauai Enterprises. Lauai Enterprises provides advisory and consulting service for early stage international startups. And so the meaning of Lauai is foreigner in Chinese. So I lived in Shanghai for about 10 years, from 2005 to 2015, and I supported and worked with a lot of multinationals, not only in China but across Asia. And today I have the opportunity to work with some cool businesses that are doing cool things in Asia. Specifically right now, there's some good engagements with, I'll give a shout out to Noodle Factory. They're based out in Singapore, and they do ed tech technology for universities. And then at South by Southwest, we have about 8 companies from Singapore coming in, and we're going to be doing an event on Sunday to meet with them and get some introductions and see how we can help them with coming into the United States to expand their business. And then with Kevin, we've been working with Uzbekistan on some early engagements there to try to help them with a number of introductions in several different areas around industrial and technology and stuff. So it's exciting. There's no shortage of business, no shortage of engagements that we can have, and I love working with these early stage organizations that are trying to get into the U.S. market and to try to do business with some of the new technologies they have. So that's what I do, and I have the opportunity to spend some time with these cool startups and younger generation that are doing some cool things. So thanks.
And part of the thing I want to make sure I do is shout out. A lot of times people think that a bridge should be just from point A to point B, like from Texas to Mexico or Mexico to Texas, something like that. Part of what I want everyone to become aware of, and one of the reasons that I invited Tyler into this conversation that we're having with Uzbekistan, especially based on his depth of knowledge of doing business in Asia. He's done a lot of business in China, especially, and Uzbekistan is right next to China in Asia. Is as an example, with our connections with a bridge that we have with the Czech Republic, one of our entrepreneurs based out of Prague that we hear from all the time during this program, David Nichols, is actually going to Seoul, South Korea. And in the last 24 hours, actually in the last 48 hours, I guess I should say, I put David, who's on this trade mission from the Czech Republic, in connection with contacts in Seoul. Part of what I want to say to everyone is a lot of times the focus might be one market, like back in 1994, when I started my Austin company. But the truth is that my Austin company, I couldn't get any of the banks in the Austin area to pay attention to my little, early stage startup. But my first $250,000 customer was actually in across this country boundary, right? Emerging technology and all that sort of stuff. Tyler's seen that before. And so that's partially why I'm glad to have you here, Tyler. Because, it's like, we don't know where the connection's going to be, right? I think as a biz dev executive, you see that all the time.
Yeah, I mean, the cool part about working with all these countries is that we think in one part of the world that the solution hasn't been created, but actually it might have in other parts of the world. And if you can connect the dots and connect some of the people up, you never know what may happen and how that may accelerate things. One problem somewhere else is there's got to be a solution somewhere in another part of the world. So it's kind of neat. So I love doing this, and I love working with other cultures and stuff. So thanks for allowing me to be on this, Kevin. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, Tyler, it's great to work with you. And yeah, we have our work done, cut out for us for bringing our Uzbekistan delegates into the fold too, but we'll be doing it. So it is indeed a worldwide effort. Thank you, Tyler.
Patience. That's all you need. A little bit of patience.
So let's hop right in, just because of activities that are happening. Part of the idea about it is in supporting the activities that happen typically around South by Southwest. A lot of times we have a lot of content that we want to share. Now, we've been preparing for this period of time. And for those of y'all that might have missed some of our previous programs, all this content's available on our YouTube channel. And if you want to interact with any of the speakers and things like that, if you go into the community site, a lot of times we will tag the speakers in the community site. We don't do it on YouTube because then that opens the speakers up to spam and stuff like that, and it creates a problem. But all this content is available inside of the community site, and you can actually go back to it. But let's talk about what's coming soon. Obviously, today we'll talk more about Happy Birthday, Texas. But what's coming soon, the suggested itineraries, if you're coming to South by Southwest, and whether you have a ticket or not, one of the things to do is we're going to have Marissa Vickers, who is a marketing and community expert. She used to work for Mass Challenge. She's got a lot of different things, really well respected by myself and other, entrepreneurial community leaders here. She's going to lead us in suggested itineraries for March 10th to the 15th. That's on March 9th. That's in 1 week. And then on March 16th, this is still while South by Southwest is going, but South by Southwest Interactive would be finishing. For those of you all that are actually taking advantage of some of those connections, part of the problem is you meet someone, but you don't necessarily know how to do the sales follow-up, especially when you're working across a country boundary. So part of the conversation, we're going to be talking about how do you integrate that experience? How do you integrate your learning, and especially do sales follow-up and know some of the key pieces about what's happening. That's going to be on the 16th. On the 23rd, I will be speaking at what's called the Davos of Lithuania, and I'll be giving a speech there, as well as 2 follow-on programs. But part of the work that we're doing, it ties into Lithuania, and you might say, why Lithuania? One of the reasons this is important is for those of you all that have a smartwatch, especially if you have an Apple smartwatch, that technology, that little green laser inside of there, it's very likely that the technology that you're using from this little country of 3 million people, 65% of the femto laser market, the medical laser market, comes from this place. And you might ask, how is it possible that 3 million people could have such a hold on that technology? We'll talk about that in a few weeks. But the key thing about it is, if you want to get ahead of what's happening in that world, in the medical laser market, part of what you have to have is you want to have a bridge there too. So pretty exciting stuff. We'll talk about that on the 23rd. And we have some activities with the Lithuanian government that are happening before and after that. I'll tell you about it in a few weeks. Then on the 30th, especially with the supply chain announcement of what just happened with Tesla, on the 30th, we're going to actually have a program with our one of our sister organizations called Venture Connections that's all about driving supply chain relationships between especially Canada, United States, and Mexico. It's done a lot of work between Texas and Mexico, and there's a lot of OEMs, car manufacturers, things like that, that are working with Venture Connections. They're looking for suppliers. Since the supply chain is shifting away from China, part of what this organization is doing is supporting, because of our long-term commitment to Mexico. Like I said, you saw that I had hair in 1994 when I was doing work in Mexico. Part of the thing about it is I actually think, and I want to make sure that there's sometimes when people hear me say this, I'm absolutely not anti-China, but I am very pro-Mexico. So we'll be talking about that on the 30th. And then April 6th, we're going to have our creativity expert. She's actually a branding expert, Christia Hoffman, speak about creativity. She has a branding company and has done a lot of programs for Tech Ranch and Tech Ranch entrepreneurs in branding. We might even see, depending on how the time goes, since she's in the studio audience today, at the end of the program, we'll see if we can slide in a one of her poems, because I'm always motivated by that. So that's what's coming soon. I like to just make sure that I let you know, because we'd love to actually have you involved in all the different programs. Real quick shout out, since I see that we have people on our LinkedIn streams and stuff like that. I am monitoring the stream. So if you have questions as we go into today's program about this, from our speakers, I will monitor the LinkedIn stream as well as the chat. And then to our studio audience, if you have questions while our speakers are going through, the right way to do this will be to raise your digital hand so that we know that there's a question, or you can always post the question into chat as well. Okay, well, I tell you what, today it's happy birthday, Texas. I'm a 5th generation Texan. I definitely know all the way back to 1868 when part of my family got into Texas. And then part of my family got into Texas in 1843. And then there's another part that got in, when it was still part of Mexico in 1835. And then part of my blood goes all the way back to 200 years before Christ, with a group called a tribe called the Caddo in Northeast Texas. So I'm damn proud to be a Texan. all the way through and through and through. So part of what we're doing today is to say happy birthday, Texas. But we're here to talk about doing business in the Lone Star State. And we have two different attorneys that we're going to hear from. John Scott was the most recent former Secretary of State of the state of Texas. I met him when he pulled together a group of around 40 consuls from different countries, and he asked me to be one of the speakers for this event. And then I did a follow-up with him at the Capitol and really got to know a little bit more about him and what he's up to. We'll hear from him, and we're also going to hear from Buck Hollister. Buck is one of our, he's another attorney that does a lot of cross-border legal services. One of his business partners is Hungarian. And by the way, since many of you know that we have a bridge between Texas and Hungary, he's got a complimentary idea about how to do things cross-border. Buck has a handful of slides he's going to go through kind of quick. We'll go through and do those kind of, in about 3 to 5 minutes of stuff. And then we're going to have a conversation among the three of us that is going to be guided by your questions. And so first off, let me say to John and to Buck, thank you for being here today. What we'll do is, Buck, since I've got the mouse finger that's driving the presentation, we'll go through that as quickly as you tell me to click.
Sure.
And then quickly, let's get to the point that we're interacting with your questions, with everyone's questions out there, so we can make sure we drive the point back and forth. First off, thank you for being here, Buck. Tell us just a little bit more about your practice, just so we have kind of a high-level view about when should someone reach out to and call you.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'm actually an attorney and CPA, licensed in several different states, including Texas, California, New York, and so forth. My background is I've worked a lot with businesses in the startup area, both on the venture funding, both on the startup side. Basically, I've worked in investment banking. I've helped launch businesses, both from bankruptcy state to basically startup. Worked with mature companies. Did a lot of work overseas in Japan with established companies, semiconductor companies, and also worked a lot with European companies as well. And one of our core areas of expertise in the legal side is working with companies where they're looking to go and enter into the U.S. market and decide how they actually want to go and structure and set up. And then on the CPA side, work a lot with setting up valuations of companies for valuations, and then also helping with tax planning services, and then also immigration. Like, for example, if you're bringing inbound or outbound, you might have like certain people that you'd like to bring in from your host country or the parent company, maybe like Hungary or even Lithuania, and you want to come into the US and so forth. How do you navigate that and try to work through all that stuff? And in the presentation today, we just had background information. We went through and just kind of put together just some slides of how you could go and enter into like either Texas if you wanted to come here, or even the US market. One of the ways you could actually go and do it would be like setting up a joint venture. If you're not as familiar with the U.S. market, that's where you partner or pair up with like a party here in the U.S., and then you work out some management structure. You work out, decide how you're going to fund the capital. There's advantages and disadvantages as far as for that structure. Another way you could go and enter into the U.S. market would be like through a distributor relationship. Let's say you have the product or the service or even the software and you want to license it in. There's different companies here then that you could actually go and hand that off to. Usually though, for like basically whether it's joint venture or distributor type of arrangements, you can get quite a bit of details and agreements, and you want to work out those details ahead of time so you don't go and get into any type of gotchas or traps when you're trying to enter the U.S. market. And especially for distributors, you kind of want to work out who's going to control the marketing and so forth. And for distribution type of networks, they're typically set up where they do more of the hand holding. It's kind of like a keystone type of delivery, where in essence they have everything ready to hit the ground running and so forth. And if you feel you have more core expertise when you enter into the U.S. market, you don't need that as much, then you could actually go and explore a reseller relationship. And that's what we kind of like refer to as a distribution type of agreement light, where it's like you have more of the management, the control and so forth, and you can kind of work through it. And then you can kind of decide, do you want an exclusive relationship or non-exclusive? A lot of times when you're dealing with these parties and so forth and setting it up, they want exclusivity. You got to be careful what you agree to, because if your market or your product starts to take off, you might find better parties at a later point. And then besides the resellers type of arrangement, You also go and you can have like a direct arrangement where maybe you feel you have the core expertise, you have people on your team where you can, in essence, actually go through and basically set up in the US market yourself. And then in that instance, you could form like a limited liability company, a corporation, or a partnership. There's advantages and disadvantages to them. You have tax implications and can get complicated very quickly, but you can also go, if you set it up right from a legal standpoint and CPA standpoint, you can get a great return and kind of hit the ground running and focus on what you do best, which is your core competency, which is the technology or product you're trying to introduce into the US market. And that's just kind of like a high level approach of some different ways you can enter the US market. There's other ways as well, but just to kind of give you a framework for today's discussion. Kevin?
That's perfect. So when we have a little, so the handout that Buck and his team have put together is going to be on the community site. So again, if you're interested in this, don't send me an email. I'm not talking to Buck. I'm talking about the rest of the world that hears my voice. Don't send me an email. What I'm going to, I mean, one of the great things about the community site, and I know many of you guys were on the original Slack site that we had, like there's more than 400 people on the Slack site. Slack started charging a lot, and we're moving all that over. If you want the link to this, and if you want to do follow-up, obviously Buck shared his email address here, but one of the things that I'd like to do, instead of doing these individual questions back and forth, I'm finding that one of the best ways of doing things is we'll post that onto we'll post it onto the community site, and then our experts like John and Buck, they want to answer your questions for the rest of the end of time, unless you actually engage them in, professionally and stuff like that. But we do ask that in the following few days after these programs, that they answer a few questions. Like there's an Ask Me Anything kind of session that happens asynchronously. So thank you, Buck, for that information. We'll make sure that we post those slides out there. Any last minute things you'd like to say before I bring on John?
No, not at this point.
Perfect. Okay. Well, I tell you what, thank you again. And Buck's insight is really great, especially because for the activities we're doing between Central Europe and Austin, or I should say Texas, because really it's more about Texas than just Austin. For the Central Europe and Austin things, they have very specialized knowledge, just because one of his business partners, one of the other attorneys, is Hungarian, another person that I hung out with when I was in Budapest last year. So thank you for being here, but we'll also have Buck follow up on some of the activities that are happening between Texas and Mexico. Let's go ahead and bring John now in. And John, so you and I got to meet when you put together that large group of consuls. Like what I think there's like 80 consular offices in Houston and a few in Dallas. And as Secretary of the State, one of the things that I found really great about interacting with you is just your understanding of business. You're not, I'd like you to tell us a little bit about your backgrounds, how you became Secretary of State and stuff like that. But what I can tell you, and I'll brag a little bit about John, one of the reasons I asked is, from my standpoint of being a long-term businessman, especially a startup technology guy, at the kind of edge of technology development, was that you were aware of what was going on in technology. You were aware of what's happening with startups, and you're aware more generally about business. Which, tell us a little bit about your background, how you became Secretary of State, and then anything else you'd like to say about, Texas and doing business in Texas. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Kevin. You become Secretary of State of Texas by not being smart enough to say no. So it's a really short answer. I'm a lawyer by training, been a practicing lawyer for 35 years. And had the good fortune of going to undergrad with the guy that's our governor, and has been a friend of mine for 40 plus years. And so that helps. But it's an appointed position. It's in charge of creating corporations. It's the conduit. It's like a giant filing system when we're talking about commercial filings, whether it's UCC1 filings or incorporation filings. It has always been served that capacity. But it has a really fun side of the job, and that's working with international countries. And I had the great honor and privilege of meeting over 60 different countries, representatives to the United States, whether they're consul generals, and in most cases also had the good fortune of meeting their ambassadors. And they all had a common request, and they all wanted to know how to tap in, either have their citizens be able to do business in Texas, or how they could attract capital and some services back into their locale. So that was one of the reasons I put together that program you were kind enough to speak at, Kevin. And I didn't think we were going to get to continue the program because every one of the consul generals were mobbing Kevin and trying to get information out of him.
Well, with that, but that to your credit, one of the things that was so refreshing about this is, a lot of times historically, there's not always been a lot of connections between the state government and technology guys like me. I mean, because typically big business, it has its place and it makes a lot of sense. But yeah, to have your attunement to the startup technology world, because a lot of times those emerging technologies are what's taking off in these other countries, and we want those technologies in Texas, right? We want those relationships. The Tesla relationship in Nuevo León is a great example. It makes so much sense to have our neighbors have, and they already have a lot of the technology support for that. So yeah, I thank you for that opportunity, John.
Yeah, and it also brings that elasticity that I think we need as governments working with them, because our citizens, they're doing business there, their citizens are doing business here. They have needs, and those folks run into issues, and it's the quickest way to get resolution for those folks in the community on both sides. And it's really kind of what we fell back on as a result of when we had the disruption of the border with the enhanced inspections. It was a great opportunity. Samuel was a friend of mine before then, Governor Garcia. But I got a call from them the Friday before Holy Week, and that led to the reopening. Governor Campos, I know you mentioned someone was on from Chihuahua. She was instrumental, and it's that elasticity. The Governor Riquelme over in Coahuila, and I've actually had the privilege of visiting with the new governor from Tamaulipas. And that's and hosting him and having some great visits. There is an immense connection between Texas and Mexico, and it is that combination. It's not just friendships, it's families, it's businesses, and it is really kind of a single organism when we're talking about the trade that goes back and forth. And I think that's what makes Texas really attractive to people. We're open for best practices. If somebody has an idea and it's the best idea, we have as friendly a business climate as possible. We don't put up impediments. We try to attract people. And that's also one of the reasons I think Texas is number one in exports in the nation for the last 20 years. Our combined exports, and I checked this right before we went on, for the last number was for 2021, $375.3 billion. And let's put that in reference. California that same year did $175 billion. The third place was New York, did $84.8 billion. And Louisiana was fourth place. They did $76.8 billion. That's $336.6 billion. So Texas exports were more than the next three states combined exports, which really kind of puts into perspective the opportunities that exist in this state. We're number one in tech exports in the United States. We're number one in all these categories. And at some point it becomes offensive to most because it sounds like we're bragging.
Well, we are from Texas, so what do you expect?
but it's great. I mean, we're tied for the most number tier one universities in the nation with California. We have 148 higher education universities available in this state. It is freakish the amount of talent that is roaming the streets, but it's also freakish the amount of investment dollars that are coming in here. And the announcements, we know of 400 some odd projects that are in the works that have not been publicized that are outrageously large in scope and size. that are game changers. And I think any state would be super proud if they had 1 or 10 or 100. We've got 400 of those. I've been approached over the last 2 weeks by folks from Vietnam, from Mexico, from Finland, from Czechoslovakia, to do new huge operations in a couple of those cases here in Texas. And it's just, I'm always stunned, but it may turn out to be the greatest yes I ever said, was when I said yes to doing Secretary of State's office. So anyway.
I mean, certainly, yeah, it's part of the thing. And by the way, as a side note for everyone, yes, in the 7th grade, there is the Texas inauguration class that all us Texans go through. And part of what you learn in that class is to brag about Texas. You know, and I've suggested to some of my friends in New Jersey that they should teach Texas history in 7th grade as well, but it wasn't necessarily appreciated. But yeah, Texas and Mexico are the largest trading partners, from what I understand. The other thing that I want to say, just on building on what John said, is Texas and Mexico border each other, just like California and Mexico border each other. But in some ways, and you might even speak about this because I hear it in what you're already saying, Texas feels closer to Mexico. I mean, say a little bit more about that, John, because I know that when I was in your office that back in November, you were mentioning some of the different things that are happening between Texas and Mexico specifically.
Yeah, we share a 1,254-mile border with Mexico. We have 4 states, Mexico states on our border, and whether it's Chihuahua, Coahuila, or Tamaulipas, and then Nuevo Leon's 8.5-mile border, literally the amount of trade that comes across there. Put it in perspective, we have over $240 billion of bilateral trade that goes across one bridge. It's the International Bridge in Laredo, Texas. That is more than all of California's exports in 2021. And that's on one bridge. That land port of Laredo, it actually goes sometimes ahead of the Los Angeles Long Beach port. That's a land port and it just is all ports. I think they've fallen behind them right now, but that'll change. So I think the relationship about how products are manufactured, whether it's Monterey, whether it's in Saltillo, whether it's in Chihuahua, they're coming across our border all the time, parts for auto parts. I think one of the reasons that Tesla was so excited to go over there and build this is it gives them the ability to tap in both to the Mexico market, which is considerable, but also to be close enough proximity to continue to do what has been done on a daily basis, which is ship those parts up to the United States or those finished vehicles up to the United States for sale. So it makes
a lot of sense. Yeah, exactly. But especially on taking advantage of the USMCA, which stands for US, Mexico, and Canada trade agreement, which is kind of like NAFTA 2.0 for anyone that like to ask. Let's go ahead and bring the three of us, Buck, Jill, if you'll bring Buck into the screen. Part of what we'll do is I want to take a few questions back and forth, or I don't know if you guys have questions for each other. John, one of the things that before we do that, I should ask though, tell us more about your business, so we just have a little bit more idea about if one of the people listening, when should they call you? Like, it sounds like you're getting involved in these larger manufacturing type of deals, things like that. When should someone call you for this type of support?
Sooner is always better. I think Buck would probably add that. You don't want to have any wasted time going down a path and figure out you went the wrong way. Now you got to turn around and go back to where you were. So I think taking advantage of a little wisdom that people have gotten from hard knocks, sometimes from school, wherever we've gained our wisdom. And I think that's always important. So right now, a lot of what's going on is we're working for companies trying to get appropriations through the state legislature. Texas legislature is currently meeting. So there's a lot of companies out there with best technologies, but you have to have the funding to buy them, at least from the government. And so this is that process once every 2 years where the legislature meets and they come up with their legislative appropriation act. And that allows the agencies to spend money. And again, the amount of spend, that goes through state of Texas is enormous. I used to be chair of the Department of Information Resources, which oversees the IT for the state of Texas. And there are incredible opportunities for large and small companies or individuals to go be listed on the DIR buy board. There are over 30 states. If you're on that board, if you're listed, your product is in a contract with DIR, that they can buy your services without going through the normal RFP process. They're exempted from that. So I think the opportunities to take advantage of business, and that's what I try and help businesses do, take advantage of gaining access to a larger marketplace.
Well, especially a lot of people don't know that with all the different, both at the federal and the state level, there's all sorts of support for emerging technology startups and larger companies to invest in these technologies, right? And so having someone like John that can kind of help you navigate that sort of stuff, not only the regulations, but also the opportunities, that's kind of interesting to do. Same thing about Buck. Let me just, I want to throw it open, since we've gone through the questions that I want to ask, and I haven't seen anyone else post questions yet in the chat or raise their hand from the studio audience. So feel free to, same thing to our friends that are watching this on Facebook and our friends that are watching it on LinkedIn. If you have a question, go ahead and post it in the appropriate area. When I look up at the screen, part of what I'm trying to track is questions and stuff like that. But so if anyone else has questions, go ahead and send me that. But perhaps Buck and John, you guys might have a statement or two that kind of helps clarify insight, even among the three of us, about, how, like, what we might be able to take advantage of during this time and things like that, or insight about how, each one of your businesses, maybe an example or two from recent conversations that you're in. Let me just totally open it up to you guys. Let's see, Buck, I think, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I was on mute. Sorry about that. I've been having some recent conversations with clients that were looking to go and enter into conversations with other companies here in the US, and they had some proprietary technology and actually what would constitute trade secrets. And so it was always good to go and bounce ideas off, and then you could find out and you can advise them. It's always good to enter into a non-disclosure agreement if you have that type of situation, so that way then you can protect your technology. You don't have to worry about giving away the whole farm up front. And so it's kind of interesting to have that type of discussion. Other discussions I've been having with clients too is that not so much where you're engaging for large legal fees or something like that, but just in essence where they kind of bounce ideas off you, like, what about if it went down this path or that path? And then they can start getting a better idea or a wire framework structure, which way to go. And then basically they have a better opportunity to be successful in their endeavors.
Perfect.
And I saw something on one of Buck's slides that I think is really important for folks to understand. If they come to the state of Texas, to really get sound legal advice from someone like Buck, because I think they need to make sure that they don't end up minority shareholders in a Texas entity, because that was the thing that really stood out on my deal when I was looking at your slides, Buck, because I think it's very important. All the different states, depending upon where the corporation is created, are governed by those states' laws. And so Texas, at least the corporate structure. So, a minority shareholder in Texas, and somebody who owns less than 50% of the stock, has zero rights, and talk about being taken advantage of. I think that's one of the things that if you go to the effort of getting into a place to do business, that you should make sure that you protect your ability to get profit off of that relationship.
That's beautiful. So we have a couple of questions. Steve G, I'm wondering, is that Steve Gingrich? Steve G is asking in the chat, he says, for Buck and John, what are a couple of the top initiatives for economic development in Texas?
As far as for economic initiatives, I'd say development initiatives, John might be able to speak more to that, but I would say for Texas, just looking at it from a tax standpoint, when I'm advising my clients, I find that it's actually better to go and set up operations here in Texas versus in California, which is another state I'm licensed in, just because you have less regulatory barriers. Number one, you don't have to go and cut through as much red tape. Second is that from a state income tax standpoint, there can also be additional benefits. And then also from an employment law standpoint, it's much easier to be able to work with different employees, set up benefit plans and so forth versus in other states as well. And that could give you a competitive advantage, especially if you're looking to try to go and lower your prices versus other competitors here in the US.
Yeah, and so on the economic development front, Texas has over 400 economic development entities in the state. And they vary in size, but every region has multiple ones. And they all have the sole purpose of trying to attract businesses. And part of that is a little bit of a dance, because to tap into some of the Texas economic development incentives that exist, you've got to make sure that you have two competing states at least for those services. A little bit of that is the game at the local level. You know, the big subject matter has been, we had a chapter 313 that would give tax abatements or reductions for property taxes from schools. And that's become a big subject of the legislature on trying to restart that in there. But even without that, there's all type of rebates that you can negotiate with the county, with the city, or the region, depending upon which one you're going to. And the best way to do that is to get a bunch of them kind of bidding against themselves. You know, a lot of folks in the tech area want to be in the Austin area, part and parcel because seems to be kind of a critical mass of software engineers, designers that allow people to kind of maybe take ideas and innovate off of those ideas. But from a corporate standpoint, it gives them the ability to go fish for some new engineers that might not otherwise be available in other parts of the state or the country. So, you know, our biggest competitors on a lot of tech projects were Toronto, for instance, because they've come up with some really quick programs to be able to get software engineers from Pakistan to go up there. So it's not just Texas versus the states for some of these critical resources. It's really Texas against, you know, Toronto, for instance, as far as local, and Monterey and Monterey Tech down there, the Institute for Technology there, put out an enormous, I think, 8,000 plus engineers a year. It's an incredibly talented workforce in that Monterey area, the very sophisticated university system and very talented.
Yeah, in fact, the university that John's talking about is kind of it's considered the MIT of Mexico. The Tec de Monterrey was the partner that TechRanch had in the venture bridge that we built in 2018, 2019. That was funded by the federal government of Mexico. That university, which has campuses across Mexico, but the primary one is in Monterey, is just amazing. In fact, you know, they were one of my first customers in Mexico all the way back to 1991. Just amazing from a standpoint of the type of technology that's happening there. I have an engineering degree from University of Texas at Austin, but I was kind of jealous that first year when I was there with my new customer, they had more advanced technology in Monterey at the university than we had at UT. Nothing against UT, by the way, but it was interesting. And I think a lot of people don't realize in the story that we're telling about Texas and Mexico delivers around 160,000 engineers per year. I've had lots of Mexican teams that I've brought into different projects and stuff like that, but they're producing, their schools are producing around 160,000 engineers per year. So it's pretty amazing. The other thing I want to make sure I say really quick to what John said is anyone who's listening is thinking about the Austin area, since we're here in Austin, is that same competitive framework that John was talking about, you can take advantage of even between the city of Austin and the city of Pflugerville, which is a little bit farther to the north, the city of Round Rock, which is a little bit farther to the north from there, the city of Cedar Park, which is a little bit to the northwest, and the city of San Marcos as an example. And so we can go into this more deeply economic development kind of questions in the future, but that would be one of the things that you might be aware of, or that anyone that's listening might want to know about. We'll do a future Venture Outfitter Weekly about that. But let me follow on with the next question from Julie Renneker. Julie is one of our health tech experts. She's got a PhD in organizational behavior and was an ER nurse before that. But she says, question for Buck, and I'm actually going to pose it to both of you because I think it ties in to both of you. What are some of the biggest surprises for your international clients experiencing and trying to enter the U.S. market, for instance, legal or regulatory requirements or liability concerns? Both of you touched, Buck and John, both of you touched on this idea that, talk to us early. Both of you all said something, essentially that, talk to us early. So you probably had a client or two that talked to you late about that. I'm just wondering, what would be the, okay, this, avoid the pain. This is the pain to avoid. It's kind of story.
Yeah, I can think a couple of things just off the top of my head. Just recently, I've had discussions with my clients is that dual use technology from a government standpoint, as far as for military applications, it's kind of interesting, even though they might not necessarily go and introduce everything physically here in the U.S. market. If they transfer it over from an IP standpoint, it could subject that to the export compliance regulations and requirements of the U.S., even though if the technology was actually developed in a foreign country, you got to be careful of that. Another surprise clients have encountered oftentimes is tax, regulations. As probably everyone knows, in the U.S. side, federal regulations and taxes can get very complicated very quickly, and you can quickly get caught up and have an additional tax liability. I'd say if you're coming into the U.S. market, it's always good to look at maybe setting up a framework of how you'd like to approach the U.S. market to give you additional tax benefits. Like, for example, work out transfer pricing arrangements. Do you want to have different offshore subsidiaries and then have them connect into the Texas market and so forth? I've also mentioned, like earlier too, is a lot of times on the IP side. For the European side, it's more trade secret that they focus on protecting their technology. But then here, when you get to the U.S. side, it may be more advantageous to also have a patent and trade secrets to kind of complement that together, because the U.S. has strong patent and IP technology laws. And then also, when different clients come in, they'll often start working out discussions or a contract, get ready to sign it. Had one client recently where they were going to actually thought they were licensing their technology, but initially they were only licensing it. And then after a few months, they were going to sign over their technology rights for a de minimis amount of value. And so that's the kind of stuff you kind of got to be careful about. The devil's in the details. And so that's why what John is saying, it's always good just to kind of check in, have a brief discussion, make sure you're on the right path and you're avoiding that, IED, so to speak, in the roadway, so you don't have to get blown up at a later point.
Understood. Sounds great. Oh, John, what about your standpoint? Anything that makes sure you avoid? Talk to me early. Otherwise, the following thing kind of happened to.
Yeah, I think it's also important to recognize that a lot of the technology can be made use of, but in order to get to that level where you're going to be making use of it, you've got to prove your concept, and that's where our universities, our medical schools are incredibly important to that technology and having the ability to have it from a great idea to having it something you can monetize. And so I think that's something that I would also make sure that somebody adds to their list of the kind of priorities. And the universities, they'll take a part of the money that's out there that is going into that technology. And so it's something to go in with eyes wide open, but you also then have proof of concept and you get peer reviewed literature that hopefully overcomes that, that I'll call it a tax. You can call it anything you want, but it is what it is. But that's something to keep in mind. I would say as an idea for people out there, especially in the tech area, look up areas that the states are having problems with. We have areas where maternal mortality in Texas is off the charts. We have and so there's a lot of technology going into trying to prevent type 2 diabetes amongst the Medicaid population or reduce it. There's blood pressure efforts. There's some new technology that's out there that I think people are trying to implement as far as studies go to see if they can then put that into play with individuals. But if I was out there looking for opportunities to put, I'm dumb as a fence post, so I don't have this problem. But if I knew how to do the technology, I think I would look at kind of some of the Health and Human Services in Texas or nationally and look at what the individual states are having difficulties with. They're the same things amongst those populations. We've got 3 zip codes up in Fort Worth in Tarrant County that have a higher infant mortality rate than Ethiopia and Somalia and a couple of other places. not a single doctor, not a single drugstore in any of those zip codes. And it's kind of a natural kind of, so there's a downside everywhere you want to look, but there's also opportunity. And those sad stories, you could be a part of helping make that a kind of a very rising from the ashes kind of phoenix effort. And so keep that in mind when somebody's out there looking for opportunities to put these large engineering brains to work on.
You know, John, that's a beautiful statement because, the mortality, the mother-child mortality rate in Texas, especially in the situation you just mentioned, being so difficult. Let me do a shout out. And what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and start a wrap up just because given our time and stuff like that. Richard, you had a question. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Jello to post that into the community area where we actually have kind of the follow-on discussion, stuff like that. Just to tie this together, we'll hear from Ava Health and David Potes, who's based out of Monterrey, Mexico, who's got a virtual hospital platform that's tied into 52 different hospitals across Mexico. At some point, part of the thing that I want to make, I want you guys to see the picture I see. Here's a technology out of Monterrey tied to 52 different hospitals there that could be, and because it was built in Mexico, it's low cost, that could be able to take on the issue that John just mentioned up in Fort Worth. Part of what we'll do is, given that we're at the end of our time and we're already getting some signals that some people are needing to drop and stuff like that to get back to their regular scheduled work days, let me just ask Buck and John, do you have would either one of you like to make a closing statement just really quick?
Just a quick closing statement is that we're available from a legal and CPA standpoint. If you have any questions, and I encourage you to raise them, I'm always happy to get back with you. Thank you for your time and listening to us today.
Yeah, thank you, Buck.
There's 1,745 foreign companies that do business and have offices in Texas. And I think that speaks really loud to what a friendly and open place it is for any and all to come and do business. So come join Texas and let's get that number much bigger.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Well, perfect. Well, let me do this. We'll go ahead and start our closing process. I want to say thank you to John. Thank you to Buck for sharing the insights. Obviously, there were some other slides that Buck had that go into much more depth. I think around 20 different slides that are there. Part of what we'll do is that will be linked onto the post and anyone's welcome to be involved in the community. The community is a community of entrepreneurs, some governmental and ecosystem leaders as well. If you want to be in the community, and especially as we've launched this new community software, we got rid of Slack just recently. So we're still kind of, getting some of the cobwebs out and making sure that we install the light switches in the right place and stuff like that. But you can get involved for free by going to techranch.com/connect. There's a big button there that says get involved in the community. If you are from perhaps a different country and you actually want to say, hey, I want to make sure I bring the Tech Ranch network to this other country, we have a country manager program that's got 3 different levels of interaction as well. You can sign up. There as well. If you're a battle-hardened entrepreneur and you have scar tissue you want to donate to other entrepreneurs, there is a program for signing up and saying, hey, I'd like to be a mentor to this network of entrepreneurs. And a little bit of mentorship back and forth can actually drive a lot of activity in a very short period of time with this network. And human life is in the balance. One of the things that really kicked my ass when I said it's time to really start driving up the activities we're doing was just a few years ago when I actually started seeing some of you entrepreneurs in our network saving lives. John just pointed out an excellent example about that, and I'll make sure that I follow up and get a couple of our health tech entrepreneurs organized around the thing that he just mentioned. But sign up for our community, and we'll go from there. So to our studio audience, I'm about to do the closing slide, but you're welcome to stick around after we stop recording. Feel free to do that. If you got a question or two, we'll do that. I always forget to mention this, and everyone drops really quick, and they're like, oh, but I wanted to. So y'all stick around. But for the rest of us, it's always my honor to get to work with entrepreneurs that are driven by vision and values for making the world a better place. Let's go change the world for the better together. Thank you all for today. I appreciate all your work and thank you for joining us. Thank you, John. Thank you, Buck.